14 years, a total of 40 movies and TV shows, and 4 entire phases. Today, we rank the first part of the Multiverse saga, Marvel's Phase 4, from the worst to the best. With the release of Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, we have reached the end of Phase 4 in the MCU, collecting a total of 16 movies, TV shows, and 1 TV special. There is so much to discuss in what has turned out to be the most divisive phase in the MCU yet. So this isn't just about my list. There isn't such a thing as a right list. So I can't wait for you to share your rankings in the comments below. The list of movies and shows to rank is in the description, and I think it's going to be a fun discussion. So without any further ado, let's get started. She-Hulk Attorney at Law comes in at number 16. This isn't just the worst of Phase 4. To me, it's the weakest thing the MCU has ever put out. I love Jen Walters. I love her journey of self-acceptance in this show. It has some really fun sequences. The fourth wall breaks really work for me, and I love Tatiana Maslany in this show.
He doesn't mean that.
But the series just feels so inconsistent and afraid of its own clever ideas, where the execution really doesn't meet the quality of the concepts. I needed this entire show to be as wacky and off the wall, no pun intended, as that last episode was, poking fun at everything the show had done, but all those mistakes were made by the exact same writers, so it's just immensely frustrating, where every good idea was met with 3 or 4 really pointless ones. And that's the biggest issue with She-Hulk. It felt ultimately pointless in Jen's journey, where she calls out the bad ideas, she attempts to fix them, and they are clever ideas, but then we just skip past all their resolution. All those ideas that were fleshed out through the show, presenting the Hulk King and intelligentsia, and all the things about Twitter and everything the show alluded to, we just skip past to the point where everything is resolved. We have Jen finally taking control over her own narrative, but we don't see her accomplishing that on screen. We just skip past to the point where she has done it. I can't wait to see more of Tatiana in the MCU. I cannot wait to see more of Jen Walters, and I'm willing to give Season 2 a shot. But as far as this show in and of itself is concerned, I'm glad I watched it so we can talk about it. I'm done with it. What If comes at number 15, and I remember finishing this show and thinking, that was inconsistent. And that's just the nature of an anthology series, right? That's the nature of the beast. You're going to have some really fun episodes, you're going to have some really great episodes, you're going to have disposable episodes. You're going to have episodes where the ideas are interesting, but the execution just doesn't meet that level of interest. By far the best episode is the Doctor Strange one. I'm a big fan of the Captain Carter episode, more than most people. But then you have the Ant-Man episode, where the idea is better than the execution. You have the Party Thor episode, fun enough to watch, and it's pleasant in its brevity, but there's really no big takeaway. The finale is all kinds of fun, a really small-scale blockbuster version of Endgame, not as emotionally compelling, but all the action extravaganza is there, and I'm a big fan of the animation style that more and more studios and movies and TV shows seem to be adapting, of having this blend of animating in 3D, but having this 2D sort of sensibility and style to it. I'm a fan of just the creativity that is exposed through this show, so I can't wait to see more of these brief stories that aren't necessarily must-watch television. They aren't necessarily must-watch elements to the MCU, but for the 20 minutes that you have to spend watching them, they're fun. They don't overstay their welcome, and even the bad ones are not that egregiously awful. Hawkeye comes in at number 14, and I've always thought Clint Barton, played by Jeremy Renner, is one of the most underrated characters in the MCU. I love what he does here as he's journeying through his grief, coming off of Endgame, losing Natasha, and a friendship that emerges with this brand new hero in Haley Steinfeld's Kate Bishop. That relationship is everything in this show. I love the Christmas cheer and spirit that revolves around the tone, and Clint has to embrace this brand new hero. I love how it involves his wife, and I wish we could have gotten more of her involvement to get more of Linda Cardellini in the show. I like that it brings Kingpin into the MCU, but throughout this story, I've always felt like it could either be a little bit shorter and be made into a movie, or needed more time to breathe. The ideas in and of themselves just feel inconsistent, where there are too many story threads here that don't necessarily connect in an organic way. They either feel rushed or they feel like they're dragging out. And that's my biggest issue with this show. I enjoy it. I think it's going to be an interesting Christmas tradition. I'm looking forward to rewatching it. It will be my second time this upcoming Christmas. But all its good ideas just leave me frustrated, because there is potential for more. The performances are all there. The character work is all there. And we have a doggo in this show. So that right away gives it a lot of good points to earn my thumbs up. But looking back upon the show in its entirety, it works better as an amusing little treat. A Christmas novelty where we spend time with characters that are tremendously interesting, that have compelling arcs to be achieved, but the story surrounding them just isn't up to par. Even introducing Echo into the MCU, launching her into her show, I don't think the series does a good job whatsoever. So it leaves a lot to be desired. There was just a lot more to explore, but if this is the way to explore these ideas, we needed to chunk it down to a 2-hour movie. And at number 13, we have The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. This was one of my most anticipated MCU shows. The Winter Soldier sort of sensibilities, the groundedness to it, the Harry Jackman score is one of the best elements. The camaraderie between Bucky and Sam as they argued the symbology of the shield, what it represents, and how Sam's actions hurt Bucky because of what Steve meant to both of them. I love the character journeys once more in this show. I'm a big fan of what it does with John Walker, but I don't feel the story confronts the characters enough about the politics. There are the thematic core of this show. The figurative conflicts that each of the characters are confronting just don't come off as compellingly as they should. Even the involvement of Zemo comes in so strong at the beginning, and then he's just relegated to the background. And by the end, it doesn't feel like the show has any clear ideas of what it wants to do with its supporting characters besides Sam himself becoming Captain America in a very rewarding moment where he accepts the weight that has been given to him, the weight of responsibility. And then you have Bucky also coming to terms with losing his friend, but hope is not lost for him. There are great ideas in here, there are great characters in here, but not enough of the people and their politics and their ideologies are put in the hot seat. They're not confronted enough. If we look at it as an exploration of the symbolism of Captain America's shield, that's where the show shines the best. It just works in that sense, with a lot of graphic imagery, with John Walker carrying that shield and how it changes when Sam carries it. But we needed more of Isaiah Bradley. We needed more of Sharon Carter if we're going to get to that conclusion where she completely turns heel by the end. There was just a lot of issues. And again, what does Captain America represent in the modern world? Black Widow is our number 12, the opening film of Phase 4, and I gotta tell you, I'm loving Black Widow in Acts 1 and Acts 2. The whole family dynamic that feels so intimate in this very crafty, gritty, spy action thriller, that all works. I love the relationship between Natasha and Yelena, how both of them are grieving in their own way about losing the one thing that felt real to them as children. And then in comes the third act, where you go to the most obvious, most cliched, most tropey elements that you could have not only in a spy, not only in a thriller, not only in an MCU movie. All of those cliches combined just bog this movie down immensely, where there's a sort of aerial station floating above Russia where the villain has been hiding all along, and Ray Winstone is not even attempting a Russian accent. I like the idea of what Taskmaster represents for Black Widow. It's very much what is haunting her throughout all these years. The reveal in and of itself, the character in and of itself, just doesn't work. We'll hopefully get a better version of it in the Thunderbolts, but it is also a movie that compromises its own emotional heft by not coming directly after Civil War. I tell you, this is the only movie in the MCU I watched out of release order. Captain Marvel, Captain America the First Avenger, I don't watch them before anything else. But Black Widow, I put on immediately after Civil War whenever I binge my MCU. But it was a nice way to say goodbye to Natasha. I think Scarlett Johansson and the character itself, they deserved this vehicle. And it still has some great action. It still has some really emotional moments, but it compromises those because of everything else. Werewolf by Night sits just out of the top 10, and I still can't believe Michael Giacchino directed this. Easily the project I was least excited for in the entirety of Phase 4, but they made it work as this homage, campy, tongue-in-cheek tribute to 30s and 40s Universal monster movies, where they get away with so much from a tonal point of view, with blood splattering on the camera, this one tracking shot down the hallway, the Marvel logo being completely ripped apart as it starts. It just really worked, diving us into the supernatural of the MCU, where we have Man-Thing, where we have a protagonist who is not a hunter of monsters, he's a protector of monsters, because he himself is one. And this is just a ton of fun. This is not like the most profound, the most compelling exploration of character or of myth and lore in the MCU, but it's just a fun, really fast, isolated event within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and that's what works best for it. Michael Giacchino just is able to bring a ton of atmosphere, combining his direction, which is just so great, and his obviously fantastic score. The biggest issue with this is that it absolutely needed to be longer. Not only because what we do get is so fun and we want more out of it, but that second act really suffers from not allowing the characters and those beats to breathe a little bit more. It also would have made the adventure in itself a bit more complicated. It would have earned those moments in the third act, which is the best part of this film, a little bit more from a character perspective. It would have felt more challenging for everyone involved, really. So it's a good problem to have, but it would have fixed and elevated the good that already exists in this special. Before we dive into my top 10 Phase 4 MCU projects, if you're enjoying this ranking, I've ranked a ton of MCU projects before, DCU projects, and just franchises in general. There's a bunch of them right here that I'm sure you'll enjoy if you are enjoying this video. Also, don't forget, give me your rankings in the comments below. So far, are we agreeing? Are we disagreeing? I cannot wait to see what you make of this. Ms. Marvel is our number 10. Iman Vellani is a revelation. She's an absolute delight to watch on screen. And Kamala Khan is an infectiously lovable character that brings so much to the MCU. A brand new culture, a brand new interesting set of powers. I love the family dynamic in this show. I love the story of this little girl who lives in this world of superheroes, and she's very much a dreamer. And then she's brought into this world, and what does she do with it? How does she grow from this? And the support that she gets from her community, from her family, the sense of camaraderie here is just so warm and so endearing. I just love the journey of this character. The show itself, I feel, loses itself a little bit in the middle with the clandestines and the parallel dimensions and the djinn and all the explaining of the powers. That should have been a second season. This should have all been about Kamala learning her powers and becoming something more, growing out of her Jersey roots, understanding that the world is much bigger and much more dangerous now that she has these powers than she thought before. And in the second season, we could have handled the Jinn, we could have handled the clandestines, the parallel dimensions, the going back to meeting her grandmother. There's a lot of emotion in there that needed much more time to breathe. It just has such a satisfying focus on character and her conflicts, and it hands on the highest of notes, really, but the middle really suffers from inconsistency in tone, in pacing, and in just about everything apart from the central character that remains undamaged. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is our number 9, and while it has dropped a few spots since my original watch, it's just a fun, wacky, trippy adventure through the multiverse with that Sam Raimi sensibility to it. Through and through, for better or worse, this is a Sam Raimi movie. From beginning to end. The horror effects, the horror elements are just so much fun to see here. It's just a perfect fit, right? The powers of Doctor Strange, the traveling through the multiverse with these weird, fantastical dimensions, Wanda's power, her working through her grief and her obsession with getting her kids back at any cost, where she turns into this very menacing villain and really one of the best in the MCU. She's fantastic, and Elizabeth Olsen gives one of the best performances in this entire cinematic universe, where her journey just feels fulfilling. It feels like the film earns finding Wanda in this place, and we get that fun section of cameos, but it's not really the cameos in and of themselves that are fun, even though they are fun. It's what they represent for the MCU. It's how they connect all these dots and create this connective tissue where there's so much more potential for what's to come in this multiverse saga. And plus, we got some cool death scenes of Wanda murdering Professor Xavier. Again, Reed Richards, Black Bolt, and all of them. I think because it has so much focus on Doctor Strange and on Wanda, both traveling through their arcs of resisting or not temptation, it compromises a little bit of both their journeys, where both of their journeys just needed a little bit more. But for what this is, and clearly in its intentions, it was very clear that it just wanted to give this one focused adventure. I think it does a good job. I just needed more from its supporting characters. I just needed more from America Chavez to be an actual character rather than a plot device. As a journey for its lead characters, it works well enough, even if it doesn't meet its ultimate potential. Black Panther Wakanda Forever is our number 8, and I just uploaded both my spoiler-free and spoiler reviews, so I'm not going to waste too much of your time on this entry. A journey of grief. That's what this is. Not for each individual character, even though there is focus on each individual character coping in their own unique way. This is about the nation of Wakanda, where the story in and of itself is fueled by the sorrow felt by the very real, tragic passing of Chadwick Boseman. That's what elevates the emotions and the themes in Black Panther Wakanda Forever. I don't think it quite is up to stack with the original one, even though there are a few elements that it does better in this one. A lot of the thematics are expansions on the original, much like we see in Namor, who is such a fantastic villain. Tenoch Huerta does a great job. Angela Bassett should, by all means, get that Oscar nom, if not the win. I just love the geopolitical conflict. The grandiose spectacle is better in this film than it is in the original. Seeing Wakanda being flooded just gets those emotions out of you. I just love the little focus on each character. And even though some character journeys are inconsistencies, the way it closes it all off, the way it pays tribute to Chadwick Boseman, the way it honors the memory of T'Challa within the MCU, just a really nice bookend to the thematic nature that connects the entirety of Phase 4. WandaVision is our number 7, the show that kicked off the entirety of Phase 4, and if not for that finale, which I really enjoy, I love my comic book giant action sequences, love seeing Vision versus Vision, love seeing Wanda giving in to her darker self, to tap into that power that gives her hope to get her kids, but also allows her to destroy the woman that really manipulated her throughout this entire series in Agatha. But still, the finale feels rather inconsistent from the rest of the show. It doesn't feel like we were building to the way this played out at all. The ideas are there, the execution just feels jarringly different. But for the bulk of the show, the creativity, the mix of sitcom and horror, the eerie tone, the creepy atmosphere where you just know something is wrong while journeying through the 50s to 60s, 70s, and all those eras of sitcoms. Even a little wink and nod in seeing Quicksilver in the way they tricked us all, very reminiscent of Spider-Man Far From Home. I adored that sort of prank that Marvel played on us. And Elizabeth Olsen, just a knockout performance, a beautiful love story, and perhaps the greatest line in the entirety of the MCU.
But what is grief, if not love persevering?
It's just a show that oozes creativity and veers off the typical structure and identity of the MCU, up until the very end, where it compromises a lot of what it did up until then. I needed more from the involvement of S.W.O.R.D. I needed more from some of its supporting elements. But on the whole, WandaVision kicked off Phase 4 in the right way. Eternals is our number 6, and this will not be the last unpopular opinion you'll see in this video. I just love the contemplative, existential nature to this film, where it's very much a movie about humanity and about family, reuniting this long-lost family because of the complexities that come with being so human, despite them being gods and here to shape the world with our mythologies and religions and all of that. It discusses so much to a profound philosophical way where each of them are grieving really in their own way because this family separated, because they lost so much. And now as much as they're trying to find each other, they are finding themselves. The visuals in here are breathtaking. The scale of this film is monumental, but it still is able to feel intimate and personal in the journey of these characters, where, much like another MCU movie we'll talk about in this video, it discusses a lot of man's relationship to God. The duality of being so immortal and so eternal, no pun intended, and yet feeling so human, so connected to the people of Earth in their flaws and in their virtues. This film immensely works for me. It gets better every time I see it. It is very much the MCU's response to the sort of Man of Steel, where it has this philosophical debate of identity. I think it needed a little bit more time to breathe. Just 10 more minutes. Give this film Wakanda Forever's runtime, and what I already love about this film gets even better. That final moment between Icarus and Cersei, mwah, one of my favorite moments in the entirety of the MCU. People are turning around on Eternals, but I've been there since day one. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings is our number 5. What a spectacular film. That gets me so excited to see Destin Daniel Cretton get his hands on Kang Dynasty. The man clearly can give spectacle with the best action in the entirety of the MCU. The choreography is just excellent. I don't think anything stacks up. It's just so creative. It's a kung fu movie in the MCU with all this flash and flair to it. It actually makes me believe a live-action Dragon Ball movie could work. I don't necessarily want it, but Shang-Chi shows me it could work. Simu Liu is a frigging superstar, and Tony Leung acts more with his eyes than most people act with their entire bodies. The relationship between father and son here makes this movie. and it allows for the spectacle with all the giant dragons and creatures to not take away from the emotion, where you have something so contrasting to the usual protagonist and antagonist conflict, where you have a father haunted by his past sins who desires to bring his family together over anything else, and you have a son who wants to run away from his destiny, who wants to run away from what was intended to him because he's so afraid he'll turn out like his father. But the antagonist is the one who desires to bring the family back together, and the protagonist is the one who desires to run away. The way this film is shot, the way it captures this relationship through the action, through the choreography, through the bits and pieces of dialogue between these two. Everything about characters and action and emotion and relationships in Shang-Chi works, but the third act really needed less of the dragons, less of the creatures, and it needed no clouds. Why do we get this drab looking location to cover up the brightness? Talo was such a phenomenal location, so interesting, so mystical, so magical, with all these interesting creatures and fascinating lore to it. We needed to ground it all a bit more and just have the armies of Wenwu against Shang-Chi protecting everything his mother held dear. Thor Love and Thunder is our number 4, and before you subscribe and click away, let me explain. I love this movie. I love the humor that is counterbalanced with emotion, which is what was missing to me in Thor Ragnarok, where so much of that film was improvised, and while it was funny in isolation, it just felt aimless. It just felt like it didn't serve the story whatsoever. The humor in this film serves the story. That doesn't necessarily mean it should work for you, but it's counterbalanced with emotion, where the emotion is the driving force of the story. I love what they do with Jane. I love what they do with the Thor and Jane relationship. I never cared for it before. This film makes me care for it. Did I need more from Gore the God Butcher? Yes, I needed to actually see some butchering, but Christian Bale's performance is creepy to no end. I love what he does in this film, and what we do get of Gore the God Butcher and how it contrasts Jane's journey, where they're both on this ticking clock, and one embraces revenge and hatred and sorrow, and she tries to do the best she can with the time she has left. It's just a film that speaks a lot to learning to embrace the moment and cherishing the time you have. Taika Waititi crafts a beautifully emotional and profound cosmic adventure amidst this wacky dressing, which is so usually his style. And obviously I comprehend why it doesn't work for everyone. But to me, as someone who loved the first Thor movie and has struggled to enjoy his films for 12 years now, Love and Thunder was a breath of fresh air that I desperately craved, I desperately needed, and my heart sang while I watched it. As a fantasy fan, it gave me the uncompromising cosmic adventure that I needed, with immensely interesting locations, fascinating expansion on the cosmic side of the MCU with that scene from Eternity, and giving Gore that bit of redemption, where he finally understands what he should cherish, what he should value, what he was fighting for all along. And now Thor is a kid. I can't wait for Thor 5, man. Quick, before you go into the top 3 movies and shows of Marvel's Phase 4, I need you to start the conversation with your ranking in the comments below if you haven't yet. And of course, if you're enjoying this MCU conversation, if you're enjoying MCU rankings, there's so much more on the channel for you to enjoy. Not just rankings, but spoiler reviews, spoiler-free reviews, post-credit scenes explained for everything superhero related. If you're enjoying this video, there's much more for you to enjoy on the channel. So if you are enjoying this and you love movies and TV, this is the place to be. So don't forget to click the subscribe button down below, and you won't miss any future conversations on your favorite movies and TV. Moon Knight comes in at number 3, and while we've spoke about many fantastic performances throughout Phase 4, Oscar Isaac might just be my favorite performance in the entire MCU, because it's such a complex role to tackle. The balance of Mark Spector and Stephen Grant, and the way he effortlessly brings each of their conflicts onto the screen, and the way he debates with himself is such a fantastic role, such a profound performance that implements a ton of fantastic elements that come with the Egyptian mythology, with Khonshu, with that contract between man and God, how it debates our servitude to others, but then it's very respectful of mental health and actually treats both personalities as a part of the system. It doesn't come to this conclusion where either of them are fake or one is real and one is a made-up situation. From the moment Mark Spector hid away from his abusive mother and Stephen Grant came as a way to protect him, to allow him to cope, he became real. And he is as real and has as much a right to live as Mark does, which is why that beautiful reunion and Mark shunning away from paradise, returning to the sands to save his friend is so emotionally fulfilling. This entire show just speaks to a ton of things when it comes to emotion, when it comes to trauma, when it comes to mental health, and it does it all beautifully amidst the spectacle of the MCU, where we have kaiju Egyptian gods fighting one another. But what grounds it, it's the characters, it's relationships, it's the trippy nature and structure to the show itself, how he put the pieces of this puzzle back together as we infuse a little bit of Fight Club, a little bit of Indiana Jones, and even a little bit of Bourne. Ethan Hawke is fantastic as this religious nut, but he makes this character so compelling because he truly believes in his cause and is willing to serve his god at any cost, which is such a contrast to Mark Spector. The action as well is the most ruthless we've seen in the MCU. The locations are always interesting. The adventure feels grand, feels rewarding, and to me it's the one show, bar another one upcoming, that feels like it makes the most out of its 6 episodes and didn't need more time to breathe, leaving us with that big surprise at the end as Jake Lockley comes in, and I cannot wait to have Moon Knight, Mark Spector, and all the personalities back in the MCU. Spider-Man No Way Home is our runner-up. What a euphoric experience. Apart from Infinity War and Endgame, not a lot lives up to the hype going into and experiencing this film in a theater, where despite a very wacky and fantastical multiverse-driven first half, it is such an emotional experience because it is a celebration of all things Spider-Man. Tom Holland gives easily his best performance in the role in what turns out to be the final piece of a trilogy that, after all, was in its entirety Spider-Man's origin story of learning the weight and the significance of responsibility, where sacrifice is meaningful. Losing Aunt May changes Peter. It has an effect on him that cannot be taken back. And that's why the cameos are fun. Not because they're here, not because we see these characters from all the other movies, but because they mean something to the story. They mean something in Peter's growth. They mean something in his arc throughout this film that he needs to actually become the Spider-Man that we know and love. Where Green Goblin, Willem Dafoe, is back and becomes one of the best villains in the MCU, but also Andrew Garfield, Tobey Maguire. They are so key to Peter's journey, where if they weren't there, Peter would succumb to the darkness. They are so fundamental for this film to work from a narrative standpoint, from a thematic standpoint. They are significant in Peter's journey to responsibility, learning what he has to do, how he has to sacrifice, and what he has to sacrifice. And the reason why he's even willing to do it is because the other Peters were in here. But even amongst all that emotion, even amongst all the tears, the Spider-Man humor, the Spider-Man identity, the Spider-Man flourishes are all here. And seeing this trio on screen just puts a giant smile on your face. It makes you feel all warm and fuzzy in your tum-tum. But easily, Loki comes in at number 1, by far my favorite series in the MCU, where it plays so much with these fantastical, wacky, inventive multiversal toys and ideas and concepts, but it allows the story to remain grounded in character, where it debates identity, it debates existence in itself. Where Eternals had a lot of these concepts, Loki does that, but much more focused. Where you have a character who comes to terms with his very existence, with his very identity as a god. What does that even mean? Is this grand cosmos of the MCU where now he's trapped because he's not supposed to exist. And knowing he eventually dies, knowing how he eventually dies. And so we're allowed to take Loki in this very unique journey to a place where we've never seen him before, where he comes to terms with facing his trauma, facing everything he did, facing his selfishness, why he acted out in these certain ways. And not only does he try to make himself better, he tries to make other selves better. He tries to make other Lokis see the light. He learns the error of his ways, and he attempts to save others like himself. That's immensely compelling. That tugs at the heartstrings in ways that other MCU shows and movies fail to do. And the way it ties this wonderfully compelling but also whimsical journey through space and time together is by introducing the contrast to Loki, the worst version of what he could become, and that just happens to be the next level threat in the MCU. He Who Remains is a frightening villain played with devilish glee by Jonathan Majors, and he is so frightening because he has control. He knows he has absolute power, and he fears no one but himself, because he knows what he can become. He knows what he will become. It raises the stakes for the entirety of the MCU going forward. It puts everything into perspective in the multiverse saga. And so every piece that came after us really calls back to this moment, to this confrontation between Loki, Sylvie, and He Who Remains. And so the series not only brings Loki's personal journey to a fulfilling resolution that sets up what's next for him, but also on the grand scale sets up what the MCU has to fear and places Loki as a key piece of the multiverse to come. And that's why it is my number one. That is gonna do it for this giant ranking of Phase 4 in the MCU. It's been a long phase, a turbulent phase, but a phase that I thoroughly enjoyed in its thematic nature. Let me know your rankings for Phase 4 MCU movies and shows in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. There is more MCU content to come to add to the already endless MCU content that is already on the channel. I hope to see you in either of those. Thank you to my channel members for always supporting the channel. And until the next one, love each other and love the movies.